everyone, this is Kathy from Hand Me Down Recipes, and we have Pooja from Indiafile.com with us today, and she is going to talk all about a recipe called barley malpua. And I'm really excited to talk about this because it's something I've never heard of course, until you filled out the form saying that you were interested, and I was so excited because in the form you said it was a 5,000-year-old dessert recipe. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so before we dive into this, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Yeah.
Good.
It's a rainy Sunday morning for us here in Southern California. And so it's much needed.
Oh, I bet. Okay. So I'm in Northwest Montana. It's snow covered.
Oh, okay.
So, but I'm glad to hear that you're getting rain, and I hope that it's a good kind of rain and not a flooding kind of rain.
Well, I mean, we have some issues when it rains a lot, but that's okay because with all the fires, we really needed the rain.
Yeah, I understand. I live in a fire, but normally for us, it's fire in the summer, obviously. So, my heart. Okay, well, so tell me first, 5,000-year-old recipe. So
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that, what that means exactly. I mean, obviously, I know what 5,000 years mean, but tell me a little bit about kind of the history of the recipe, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So these days, we don't really associate barley with, any kind of cuisine that I'm super familiar with. Particularly the cuisine of my heritage, barley has largely been replaced by rice and wheat. But 5,000 years ago, barley was the main grain that was eaten across the Indian subcontinent. And we know this because there is literature from 3,500 BCE. It's called the Rig Vedas. And it's one of the most ancient texts from India. And it mentions this specific dessert. And it says that it was made with barley and with honey. And it doesn't give a specific recipe. It just describes the dessert. And so what I thought I would do is try to recreate it.
Right. And so is it a recipe that your family made or just something that you have tried to recreate?
So this recipe has endured through the centuries, but it has obviously transformed. So we still eat this recipe today. We eat malpuas, and it's a very popular recipe across many different parts of India. But my family particularly, we ate it pretty frequently. It's a very popular celebration food, but we make it with wheat.
Okay.
Yeah. So obviously it's transformed. And then we also don't use honey anymore. We use a sugar syrup. And so it's essentially a little fritter fried and then dipped in a syrup. So not that different from a donut. But it's changed in that now we no longer use barley, and instead of honey, we make a sugar syrup and we add some spices to it. But the essence of it, has endured, and we eat something very similar on a regular basis.
Okay, and you said, because this was my next kind of question, was when would you normally eat it? And you're saying it's kind of a celebration, so it's not something that you didn't necessarily have on a Wednesday afternoon, but right, because it's kind of not fussy. But anytime you fry something or whatever, it's not something you're going to do.
It takes some time, and you're not. Yeah, but often my family would make it for Diwali, which is the Festival of Lights. But it's eaten across India for many different types of festivals, depending on where you're from. But it's typically kind of a more of a celebration type of a food.
Okay. That is really interesting. And something else that you said in one of the questions I had was that you mentioned that your family more often uses sugar syrup instead of the honey syrup. Okay. I made it with the honey because, I love honey.
Yeah, no, that is the recipe because that was how it was done in the ancient times. So I was trying to recreate that ancient style of making it.
Sure, because honey would have been more available than cane sugar 5,000 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah, certainly.
Yes. Even though India, refining sugar cane did come from India, it came a couple of millennia later, from what we understand. So I don't think they were doing, they didn't have sugar at that point.
Right.
But it's really interesting.
So while this would not be traditional by any means, but would you ever use maple syrup instead of honey or sugar?
I haven't, but that does sound really good.
Does it? Okay,
and I use maple. I use maple syrup for cooking, just, regular stuff. Like I put it in my oatmeal or I put it in my chia pudding, stuff like that, because it blends really easily.
Right.
And it's, I try to avoid processed sugar when I can for everyday foods. So it's really easy. And I can imagine just swapping out maple syrup because I think it would just be, you could probably just heat the maple syrup slightly and just add them directly in. You wouldn't even need to add any water or thin it out. Yeah. I think that'd be really good.
Yeah. And so the reason I thought about that is because we actually, at my house, we actually tap our maple trees. And so I have maple syrup. I always have maple syrup.
That sounds amazing.
Right. Yeah. Well, I just happen to live in the right climate. You don't live in the right climate for that.
No, I don't.
So I live in the right climate. And we do that because we enjoy it. But then I also, the maple syrup, having it means I can be a little more free with it. Because it tends to be, obviously, if you're buying it at the store, it's expensive stuff. But then when I was making it yesterday, I was trying the recipe just yesterday. And I was like, okay, let's, and I made it just exactly like your recipe because I wanted to do it exactly. But then as I was making it, I was like, oh, I think maple syrup would be really good. And then even though there's cream, I haven't tried it yet, but next time I make it, I will. And then I thought, well, that would be vegetarian, sort of. There's still milk in there.
Yeah.
So it would still be vegetarian, but not vegan.
Not vegan, yeah.
Suppose. And so you could probably use a milk.
Yeah, or any type of milk. Yeah, right, absolutely. Yeah. I think it would work well.
So for anybody who really wants to try something different, you could absolutely.
For sure.
And we will link her recipe so that you can go for it. And all right. And so then the other question I had, obviously barley, and you have the instructions to use like a Vitamix blender.
I couldn't find barley flour. I went to Sprouts and Whole Foods, and it was just not available anywhere near me, at least. So
right. And you live in a much larger area. So I live in a very small town, a town of like 5,000 people. I mean, the county is large enough, but there's not a whole lot of options. And so I did hit like 3 or 4 different grocery stores, and I didn't find barley flour either. But we quite like beef and barley soup at my house. So I had pearled barley. That like wasn't a big deal. So, but I also happen to have a grain mill because I grind wheat to bake bread. And so I have that. And so yesterday I did try grinding it in the grain mill. And then I did, just to make sure it was fine enough, I did end up going through the Vitamix just a little bit more because the grain mill is slightly grainy. So anyone who maybe has a bit better grain mill than I have could probably do that and it would work just fine, I think. So just as a little tip for somebody who might have something.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. I have the grain mill attachment for my KitchenAid mixer. It's nothing super fancy.
Right.
So that's that. And is it something too that you would serve like at a birthday? I don't know.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You could serve it for a birthday, for anything where it's, just you want to make a little bit of a special treat.
And you serve it as dessert, like after dinner, not because you mentioned it's like a fritter, and I'm like, yeah, it could almost be like donuts for brunch or breakfast. I wouldn't have made that comparison, but yeah.
Well, so Indian food is served very differently than Western food. We don't do courses in the way of, starter, main, dessert. We tend to serve everything all at once. And the dessert goes along with the rest of the meal. So it is a sweet treat. You typically do eat it at the end of your meal because that's the flavor you want to retain. But we don't typically serve it as a separate course. So it is kind of part of your meal. But it's also something that I personally would just eat at night before bed or something as a little dessert. So yes, it is a dessert. It is not breakfast, but it is typically served, traditionally served as its own, as part of a meal. But I eat it separately as a dessert all the time.
Okay.
There was something I did want to mention about the recipe, which is, I think it's really interesting because we don't have a lot of records about how specifically recipes were created back then. But the fact that this recipe is so old, and it mentions some cooking techniques, which I thought were really interesting because they are so old. So it's ghee making, which is making of butter, but then clarifying it and then deep frying. And then obviously also grain milling, which you just mentioned, which that triggered for me. It's like, these are 3 things that to me seem a little bit more sophisticated. It takes a little bit of effort, and to know that it was being done 5,000 years ago is kind of cool.
Right. Because ghee is quite a process. I mean, it's quite the process. I have I have done it. It's been a very long time since I've done it. I'll just buy it now. Thank you. But it is quite the process to do and to do correctly. And so that's really interesting. And yeah, and these are the things I wanted to talk about on Hand-Me-Down Recipes, because I love the idea of like just knowing where things have come from, how things have evolved. And especially so in our modern culture, right? And especially with the internet, we can find recipes for anything, but often it's done with a modern twist, which is fine because we have obviously gained a lot of technology, right? I can grind grain. I don't have to do it by hand. I can just grind it through something I plug into the wall, which is fine and wonderful. We've gained a lot, but I don't want to lose the tradition and the wonderful things, and food especially, right? It brings us together. And I want to know personally, like when I go to someone's house, when I visit someone, I want the food. Like, don't make food for me. Make your food, because that's what I want to eat, right?
Yeah,
like,
I
want to eat what you eat, and I want to like really immerse myself in that. And so I think that's so important. And that's one of the things I just loved about this recipe. It was just so fun to kind of hear. But speaking of ghee, because this is another question, while not traditional, because again, I live in a small town, ghee is not easy to find, especially in a larger quantity. You have to kind of buy and it's expensive if you're going to buy it.
Very expensive.
And it's expensive anywhere, I'm sure. But right. And I live in like a little town in the middle of Montana, and there's not a whole, the regular grocery store kind of lumps international foods together.
Oh yeah,
it's terrible,
for sure.
Right? Like it's like we have Hispanic food, and we have Thai food, and we have it's all in one little section, and it's all there, and that's your choices, and that's pretty much it. I mean, the health food stores have a bit more option, but is there something else that you would recommend frying in if ghee is difficult for people to find?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, or if you wanted to keep it vegan, you definitely could fry it in whatever neutral oil that you have on hand that has a high smell point, as long as it can handle the temperature.
Sure.
Also, coconut oil would work really well. It would give it a little bit of a coconutty flavor, but I think that would be really nice. So yeah, whatever can handle the smoke point and that you use around the house is just fine.
Okay, so that is the important part for anyone who might be new. The smoke point is very important, right? Otherwise, it's going to be not so good.
It's not going to be great, yeah.
Great. And you do mention to do it in a shallow pan. So when I was doing it, I just used a cast iron skillet.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that almost all of us have something like that we could do it in. Right. And so, and for anyone, because we are a household of 2 at my house. So I halved her recipe because I felt like the whole recipe would be a bit much for just the 2 of us. And I wasn't sure. So this is a question for you. What do you do with leftovers, assuming you have leftovers?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I put them in my fridge and I eat them across, for the next week or so. But we also have really wonderful neighbors who who love to share. Uh-huh. And so a lot of my neighbors often get some of our extras. My parents live nearby. They live about 15 minutes away. My brother and sister-in-law live not too far as well. So they often also get some of the extras. Because
it does make a lot. It does make a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a good way for us to, just let people know we're thinking of them. So when we do make extra, we pass them on.
Good for you. Yeah. And as a food blogger, you probably have extras. So, I often have extras. And while certain things I will just freeze and we could munch later, but, there's only so many cookies and sweet things you want to have around the house. So we definitely share with the neighbors often. Yeah. It's good to be the neighbor of a food blogger, I think.
Yes. Sometimes you get the experimental stuff and it's not so good, but...
Yeah. But I've never had anyone complain. Often, I think, and this is probably true for you too, we have a tendency to be harder on ourselves about the recipe. It may not turn out exactly how I had envisioned, but it still turns out quite edible. It's just different. Yeah. I'm sure that's true for you too. Yeah. And so you eat them cold though, leftover.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
But you can warm them up.
Right.
Either way. But I like them. Yeah.
Cold. I was thinking warming them up in the oven.
I'm kind of lazy when it comes to leftovers. But yeah, no, it's probably better if you warm them up.
Right. Right. And I do have just a couple of extras. Like I said, we have the recipe and I put them in the fridge and then I was like, I wonder if I should warm them up or if we should eat them cold. And it's early yet, so we hadn't quite dug into them yet. But I'm like, oh, you know what? Now that you said that, it's like cold with a cup of hot coffee actually might be quite lovely.
Good,
yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. And then do you ever like put your own spin? Do you ever switch it up in any way? I don't know, sprinkle coconut on it or do anything like that? Do you do anything?
That sounds really good. I think it'd be pretty good with ice cream, like a scoop of vanilla ice cream. That I think would be really delicious.
Yeah.
Often, in modern times, they are made with a little bit of fennel seed added. This is completely non-traditional. But my son really likes sprinkles.
Like colored sprinkles.
Colored sprinkles, yeah.
Sure.
So if I want to make something that I want him to eat, he's kind of a selective eater.
Yeah.
Adding sprinkles often does the trick. So I would add sprinkles if I were making it for him because it would just be more interesting to him that way.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say I am 50 and sprinkles are never like I don't think I will ever turn anything down with sprinkles. I wouldn't turn this down without the sprinkles, but if something has sprinkles on it, I'm probably going to gravitate to it. So I don't blame him. Good for him. So that was the other question is other spices. So cardamom is obviously lovely. And I love cardamom and I always have it in the house. But when you said fennel, my husband quite likes that kind of fennel and anise kind of flavor, the licorice kind of flavors. So he would probably really like that. So that's interesting. And is it the ground fennel or do you actually just put the whole?
You could just put some whole seeds into the batter, but you can grind it if that's what you prefer also.
Yeah.
I think.
So in the batter, not in, see, I was thinking in the syrup. So in the batter.
Yeah, in the batter. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But you can put it in the syrup too. Double it up.
Right. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah.
Oh, so that's really good. All right. So is there any other spices that you play with when you make it?
The cardamom and saffron are the traditional. I really like nutmeg as well, which works really well.
Yeah.
Fennel seeds. I haven't done it with malpua, and I don't know how it would work. I think I would have to play around with the syrup if I wanted to. But like a chai spice, I think is really good for all sorts of different yeah.
Just everything. So,
or even a pumpkin spice works well. It's very similar.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, ground ginger would work really nice too. I think in the batter.
Right. And so I'm always, because sometimes I feel like, while I would want people to preserve tradition, obviously, sometimes there's like sometimes it's the smallest roadblock that will stop us from trying something. And often it is the spice. If it's a spice that you don't particularly like or whatever, it may stop you from, I often think, caraway seeds, for instance, is a flavor that a lot of people don't like. And they're instantly like, they don't like rye bread, but it's really that they don't like caraway seeds, I think, often. So I always am trying to find ways for people to be willing to try something that they might, even if it's like, so yes, preserve tradition as much as possible. But if there's one thing that's stopping you, try to find a substitute.
Oh, 100%. I agree with you. And I also, so I was born in the US, but my family moved to India when I was 4, back to the US when I was 9, back again to India when I was 12, back again to the US when I was 17. So I really grew up back and forth. And I don't know, maybe it's a product of this very bicultural life, but I really feel very strongly about, yes, know your tradition and honor them, but it's okay to make food that reflects everything around you and combining the different cultures and different foods that you have exposure to. So I'm all about mixing spices that come from a different region or making a little tweak here or there because you like it better or because you see something at the grocery store and you think it might work. So very, very supportive of that idea.
And because if you can't travel for whatever reason, money or the climate in the world or whatever, one of the best ways to get to know another culture is through their food.
100%.
You will never regret it. You honestly, like, I'm just speaking to the readers, listeners, you will never regret trying a recipe from a different culture. And so the one thing I wanted to say about your recipe that I think, so I always say this to everyone about everything, like you have to the more you do something, the more you practice, the more experience, the better, the more efficient you become, the better it becomes. So I feel like that's probably true for the Malpua in that, because you want to get that texture just quite right because in her recipe, it says you want it to be like a thick pancake batter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we all know what that is. You don't have to be like a famous cook to know what that like. So is it something that you think that you just kind of get the feel for after a while? Like you just know as soon as you stir it, this is right.
For sure. Yeah. But in this case, I had never worked with barley flour before. And I was trying to, I saw a little piece of text and I was trying to create a recipe around this short little description that just said, they were fried, made out of barley and soaked in a honey syrup. And that was really all the reference I had. And so I started experimenting and I tried it several times and I tried it several different ways I was trying to get a texture that was similar to the malpuas that I'm familiar with in modern times with these ingredients that, don't exactly have the same feel. So I tried it multiple times and I tried different textures. I mixed different things. I used yogurt. I didn't. Often modern recipes are made with yogurt and they're made with semolina, which is a little bit of a coarser ground of wheat and wheat flour kind of combined together. So I tried kind of a coarser grind of the barley, and it just kind of fell apart or it was too mushy. So I tried it multiple different ways. I tried different combinations of different proportions of liquid. And so I guess, yes, you would do it by feel. But in this case, I would say you would know it as soon as you dropped it into the fat, is that if it's not holding together or if it's, just like spreading out and the edges are falling apart, then you've added too much liquid. And, maybe add a tablespoon of flour back in. Or if you've used up all your barley flour, add wheat flour. It's fine. It'll
work.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So that's because when I made it, and, and that's the thing too, like depending on how you grind it, that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
And barley flour is going to absorb water differently than wheat flour, right? This is what I tell people when you're making bread recipes. Every type of flour absorbs water differently. So you just kind of have to feel for it. Very good. Oh, that's so exciting. I just love it. All right. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about one other thing. When you mentioned the saffron. So saffron is very expensive for anyone who doesn't know. And it's part of the crocus flower. So it has to be handpicked. I understand fully why it's expensive, but it is very expensive. So she does say that it's optional.
It's optional for sure. Yeah.
But a flavor that I really love was saffron, and I think would actually be really good in the honey syrup. And I'm going to have to try this now that it just quite literally is rose. So a little bit of rose water might be very good.
Rose water is delicious. Absolutely.
Right. And it's so good with saffron. They're two flavors that I really love together. So that just came to me. I haven't tried it.
That's a very Persian combination. Rose water and saffron. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's delicious. I agree.
So I think what I'm trying to say, even though it's not my recipe, but is to just go and play with it. Please. Make it once the right way, the way she tells you to, and then as you're making it and you learn, then go play with it and make it your own.
Please.
Well, Pooja, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Tell everybody where they can find you online, please.
Yeah, I'm at indiaphile.com. So that's INDIAPHILE. And yeah, I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube.
Yeah. Great. All at Indiaphile, I'm assuming. Yeah?
Yes.
This is your handle. Great. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Yes, this was fun.
Thank you.